Hey, welcome back to our podcast, your go-to source for all things real estate and lifestyle in the heart of Fort Worth, Texas. I'm Jackson Christian Berry.
And I'm Jean Kristen Berry.
And together, we're here to guide you through the vibrant world of Fort Worth and surrounding suburb living.
We believe in creating a community where everyone feels at home. And that's why we're committed to bringing you honest, expert advice in a fun and friendly way. From the bustling streets of downtown to the serene suburbs, we've got the scoop on what makes each area unique.
Each week, we'll dive into the latest market trends, offer tips for both buyers and sellers, and share insider knowledge to help you make informed decisions. So whether you're a first-time home buyer, a seasoned investor, or just curious about some of the Fort Worth charming neighborhoods, you're in the right place. Let's jump into today's episode. Well, howdy, folks, and welcome back to Welcome Home.
Welcome.
Fort Worth. One of our favorite things to do is to make content for y'all and to talk about. I mean, we do lots of different kinds of talks on this podcast, but today we're talking about tips and tricks and kind of just going into what we are finding is really helpful right now for our clients and people in the market. And that is kind of negotiation strategies and negotiation tactics and
which is one of our favorite things to talk about.
It is because for me, I mean, if you talk about Zillow and what Zillow has brought to the real estate industry, one of the main reasons that a real estate agent exists is negotiations. It's one of the core things that we're actually useful for. There are a lot of other things, to be very clear, but it's one of the main things, and it's really important, and we take it very seriously. I do most of my algorithm on YouTube. My YouTube shorts is all like negotiation strategy guys, like Chris Voss and a couple other guys. It's just really important to us, and it's important for an agent to be somebody who can negotiate well. You know?
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of our main skills as a realtor.
Yeah,
and it's important, and that's one of the things that sets us apart from an experienced realtor versus somebody who's just getting into the business. Is how many deals have you negotiated? How many things have you negotiated? People that get into real estate who came from a negotiation background, like maybe that was their corporate job, can do really well in real estate because they have a lot of skills and techniques. So it's something that as realtors, we really work to learn. Yeah. It's something we really work on.
Well, and your background is in counseling too.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a whole like knowing people side of that's big. That I think is important.
Well, and we were always trying to negotiate people to mental health, right?
Yeah, sure.
So you're always trying to talk people into, hey, let's take care of ourselves. Let's do something a little better. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, negotiations is part of, I love listening to negotiation people because they talk about how negotiation is part of your daily life. Like if you have a child, you're going to negotiate to get them to eat that thing that they won't eat or to get them to share the toy or whatever it is, right? You're negotiating all the time. Or a spouse. You're negotiating with spouses all the time.
Yes. For sure.
So
with a boss,
yeah,
I mean, everybody.
Negotiation's important, and there's a lot of different things. So let's just jump in real quick with when should somebody expect to negotiate in the process of a real estate transaction?
So the points, basically, the different
when's that
going
to happen?
Yeah, where that's going to happen. Well, the first point, of course, is once you find the house or you're selling your house and you have a buyer come in with an offer, then you're going to be negotiating that offer.
Okay.
The cool thing about real estate, and also for a lot of people, the frustrating thing, right, is that there are over 30 different places in a contract where you can negotiate the point.
That's a great point.
There's so many different places. And, if you don't know what your options are for those different spots in that contract, then you don't know what you could or couldn't do.
Well, you're not even playing the game.
Exactly.
Like you're playing on easy mode, and there's a whole different way to,
Yeah, you don't know the tricks.
Yeah, you've got to be able to do that because that's how you serve. I mean, for a real, this is real estate mode, but like for realtor mode, you've got to be able to serve your client better. Like you've just got to be able to be useful to them. Yeah. And this is a really core reason of what we have to be able to do.
And, a lot of times in a contract, and any attorney would tell you this, the reason that we pay so much attention to all these little negotiation points is because down the road, if things go a certain way, you want to make sure that you're protected or that you get the better end of the stick, right?
Or have an out.
Yeah, or even have an out.
Yeah.
So that's what we're always thinking of when we're negotiating for a client is, if it goes this way or if it goes this way, do we have them covered? Yeah. How's it going to end if we go that direction?
Yeah. All right. So getting your offer accepted, whether you're the buyer who submitted it, you're negotiating terms, or the seller going back to the buyer to say, terms. Option period repairs.
Yeah,
so here in
people
Texas,
forget about that.
People really do. Negotiating option period repairs or money in lieu of repairs. having that general inspection done and figuring out what's wrong with the house and figuring out if this is something that you want to proceed with on the buyer side and the seller side, being open to whatever they send to you, while also standing firm and not giving in everything if it doesn't make sense for you to give everything. So
yep. And just knowing the parameters, what are the parameters you can negotiate if the air conditioner isn't quite cooling enough?
Yeah, and that's
what's
coming.
normal?
That's coming. Whoa.
That's all part of that.
This is one of my favorite things Mom talks about. So we'll get there. All right. So we talked about option period, repairs, negotiations. You're gonna have some potentially have appraisal negotiations if the appraisal doesn't meet value. So there's some appraisal differences that might need to be covered and figured out who's covering that. And there's also kind of the just finalization of the repairs, which that you negotiated earlier, which is making sure the repairs are completed
correctly
and correctly and done right. And then making sure the home's in closeout condition, right? And so making sure that the home wasn't trashed in the process of the person moving out. Then just moving out, closing dates, lease backs, making sure all
you need
of
an
that
extra
is
day, those kinds of things. Yeah. One of the most interesting ones I had, a case happened where we were selling this house and we were at the closing table and the neighbor across the street called my client while we were at the closing table and said, "Did you know that the seller had backed into the garage and you have a huge hole in your garage?"
Yikes.
And we were at the closing table.
Yikes.
We didn't know that. And so we were able to get pictures and
stop signing.
Yeah, hold up and negotiate everything right before we closed.
Good grief.
But that was a thing, yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
So that negotiation was at the very end.
Wow.
The very end of the deal.
Yeah, that's substantial.
Yeah.
Man.
So you just never know.
Wow. Well, so those are kind of when you might need to negotiate. So those are the opportunities for negotiation along the way in the real estate transaction. Let's talk about some nuances that just exist in the Texas real estate contracts. So really, the contract gives the buyer a lot more outs than it does the seller, just by the basis of how it's structured. The seller, like if you're a seller and you accept an offer, you're kind of held to that offer throughout the whole time. You just say no. Like you have the ability to say no if they're asking for you to do other things, but you don't really get to back out of that contract. The buyer is the one that actually ends up backing out of the contract. So that's a really important nuance to be aware of as you're that person in the contract, because that affects how you play the game. That's good. That's kind of the base rule in the situation that you're in and how you're gonna play the game.
Right. And kind of as a little side note to that. So in Texas, nobody can make you sell your house. What we're talking about here is that if you try to back out of a contract, then you are in breach of contract.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then you could be sued.
That's a better way to say that. You're
yeah,
totally right.
So you could be sued. And so we always recommend our clients to not breach contract because that puts you in jeopardy of being sued.
Yeah, we don't want to do that for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So I'm trying to think of what else. We do a market update every month on this channel, mainly to keep people updated with what the experience of the buying or the experience of the selling might look like. So always keep in mind market conditions that are going on, because that'll definitely play a part into how you feel, how this experience feels for you. If it's a buyer's market and the buyers have all the power, sellers aren't going to feel as good, but buyers are going to feel really good, and vice versa. Yeah. Sellers might feel really good in a seller's market, and buyers may have a hard time getting in. So.
And just being realistic and knowing this is the way it is.
And it's going to change the way you play the game. Again, like I use that phrase a lot in the game. Like it's going to change the way that we play, the strategies that we employ throughout the process. For example, like in a market where there are not many buyers and a lot of sellers, you don't really need to care a lot about underwriting before you can obviously, but you don't really have to get underwritten, before you get under contract. But man, if there are a ton of buyers in this market and not a lot of sellers, y'all, like getting underwritten is a great strategy for how you can just get ahead in the game if your lender will let you in, all that kind of stuff. But there are so many different ways that I'll encourage you to play the game that will just put you a step ahead of everybody else in the market.
Yeah, and that's important because it increases your negotiation power.
Yes, and that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that you look amazing in whatever market you're in as the buyer or the seller. So. All right. Well, how we approach negotiations, and kind of how I talk to people through stuff and you do as well. So, talking about repairs. Okay. When it comes to the repair items, we're going to talk about these in 3 different categories: broken, worn, and cosmetic items. Okay. Right. And I like to add on kind of the seller temperature gauge. So we'll talk about that. or the buyer temperature gauge for that matter. So as a broken item would be like the AC doesn't work. Right. A worn item would be like the AC is 15 years old, and a cosmetic item would be like the AC unit on the outside has a dent in it, but it still works completely fine. Like it's a cosmetic, it's not causing any problems. It's just purely cosmetic.
Or maybe flooring or scuffed paint.
Yes. Or just the wrong paint color. If they have a super pink room and you don't want pink or whatever, whoever it is. Yeah. So we're talking about those 3 different things because those elicit 3 specific and very different reactions from whoever you're requesting them from. So if I'm the seller and I'm receiving a request to repair or give money for a broken item, I'm not going to be as angry because I understand that you need an AC unit in Texas to work, right? I may not want to give you all the money for it, but I might be a little more willing to give you some money towards it, right? So with a worn item, and you're asking me to repair it, windows are what we see most frequently in this, a window that's lost its seal. When it comes to that item, I'm going to be a little more angry as a seller because it's just fine. The windows have done just fine throughout the years. I'm going to be a little more amenable, and I may go for it and give you a little bit of extra concessions or things like that. However, if you're asking me for an aesthetic thing, I'm going to lose it. And I'm not talking about me personally, but what we see, sellers lose it. They go ballistic because you have asked them to paint a room a different color, and you have asked them to do this specific aesthetic change. And so there really is this correlation between broken, worn, cosmetic, and seller or buyer, same thing if you deny it, right? Anger levels, okay? And the reason why that matters, okay, why the heck do I care if they matter or not? We just mentioned this, right? 4 opportunities in the transaction to negotiate, right? So if you get your offer accepted in the first place, but you burnt your bridge, you made them so you probably wouldn't get your offer accepted at that point. So in the repair negotiations, if you burnt your bridge and all of a sudden you have to do some appraisal negotiations, well, they're not going to want to work with you, or they're not going to be willing to give you what you want because they're so angry and put off from the way this other thing was handled, right? And so we got to keep the whole experience of the real estate transaction in mind as we do this, because if we are burning the bridge day one, well, we're going to have a hard time getting closed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We're going to have a really hard time getting closed.
Yeah, don't go for the juggler.
Don't do it. Just don't do it. And you have, she says all the time, catch more flies with honey. And it's just, it's negotiation. People I listen to talk a lot about how people want to do things for people they consider to be friends, people who like. And so if we can stay in that mode as long as possible, while still best representing what you want. Right. We're not saying, if the seller gets mad, then you just cave, or if the buyer gets mad, you just cave. We're not saying that. You got to do what's best for you. But if we're talking on an overview level of how to approach this and mindsets and strategies, this is what we want to keep in mind.
Hey everyone, real quick before we get back to the show, if you're on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, we'd love to connect with you. We post a lot of content like this in case you miss an episode, along with more Fort Worth and surrounding suburb local insights and finds. You can find our team at the Christenberry Group on all social platforms, or you can connect with Jackson and I personally on our Facebook and our Instagram accounts. Just be prepared for lots of pictures of my grandson on either account. Now back to the show. Well, and we can usually tell too if we have the other side and they are being unreasonable.
Yes.
And so we try several of our techniques, right? But if we find they're being unreasonable, then we're going to know that is not a party that we're going to be able to be kind and cooperative and considerate with. And so at that point, we're going to change tactics.
Yeah, and we're changing tactics all on the way, trying to figure out what works best. But
we prefer, and we find that most people respond best when we go at it with the honey approach.
Yeah, there's a reason. From an agent to agent level, there's a reason why it's a co-broke fee. It is we are in this together. We are working the transaction together. Let's not be people who are, attacking each other. Let's work together to make this the best for our clients. That's the goal.
Right, because we have a buyer who wants to buy.
Yep.
We have a seller who wants to sell.
Let's make a deal.
Let's put them together.
Let's make a deal. All right, so we talked about kind of the repair ideas and kind of how we approach that and how we think through that. The other thing that I see a lot is that, especially in more buyers markets where buyers just want to ask for rate buy downs and stuff like that, there are agents who will send in, concession amendments, right, that say $10,000. They've not told us what that's for. They've just said, I want $10,000. And it's like, well, I do too, but like, I'm not just giving you free money in this whole gig.
What are we doing here?
Why are we doing this? And so there's a lot to be gained if you can actually just give reasons for your things. We do this a lot we want to try to get as many quotes as we can on the buyer side as we submit kind of your asks, because we want them to see we're not being outrageous, or we're not trying to be outrageous. They may consider us to be outrageous regardless, but we're not trying to be outrageous. We really are specifically saying we want these things repaired. This is the cost that we've gotten from a bid that we believe is reasonable, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we don't quite know sometimes when we go into negotiation what kind of seller or what kind of buyer we have on the other end until we start going forward and we're doing some things and trying to negotiate. And then we start figuring out what kind of person we have on the other side. So that helps us then change our strategy, and then we can either be more direct or more explanatory, whichever way we need to go.
Yep. But hopefully friendly regardless, unless you just have somebody who's just being irate.
Yeah, and then we just go to real, just cut to the chase.
Yeah, you're just gonna say no.
Matter of fact,
you say no.
Just very matter of fact.
Yep. You don't engage. And then on top of that, we always want to keep in mind that we want to leave a little room in the budget for negotiation, right? Right. And that's just because on average they're going to come back and ask and say, "I'm not doing your first ask." That is just, whether it's a seller or buyer, they're probably not going to go for your first ask. They're going to want to negotiate. And I think what I notice at least is, and you probably have data, I would guess, to speak to this, but that seems to be a psychological thing.
It's huge.
It is such it's a gut reaction of like, we may be talking something like $2, like they're just it's never $2, right? But just to show the drama of this.
Sometimes it's not a lot.
It may be not a lot, but they want to feel like they didn't get screwed, like they held their ground, or that they do this, and that's where that compromise thing comes in.
Sure. Yeah, and we've had situations where, if somebody came back and it was agreeable without a negotiation, that instantly the other side felt like, oh man, we should have gone less, we should have gone more, or whatever it was. So it tends to make people
immediate
doubt.
remorse. Yes.
They doubt.
That is so funny. You're so right.
So even if we can go back sometimes with just one little term, we just need to go back with something. Sometimes is important to do. So that's a thing. The other thing I see, it's real interesting. It's probably also a psychological thing. I bet it's about 80% of the time when you come back, like if somebody wants $10,000 and then you come back $5,000, that whole having, where they have the number, that happens so often. I mean, it's just an instinctual kind of thing that people do.
Yep. That's funny. It really is very funny.
Yeah.
So
it's a thing.
Well, and then what I think is a big part for you to know as somebody who owns a house or wants to own a house, it's going to be an emotional process. It's going to be emotional gut reactions. Again, what we just mentioned, like little things are going to feel like big things all of a sudden.
Everybody's stressed.
Everybody's stressed. If you're a seller, it's like, this is my home. This has been great for me. I've never had any problems with this. Why do they think this is a problem? There's that whole side of it. If you're a buyer, why is the seller not being reasonable? Whatever it is. And so this is we'll call it a shameless plug, but like it is just, you need a third party. Like you just need a third party in this. And that is really just to help you not be, one, to help the negotiations, because it's really helpful when you're not actually talking to the person that makes the decision. And there's this kind of time for them to deal. And for agent to agent, it's really helpful if this person tells me something that's frustrating for my client. I can help my client navigate through the emotions while we're dealing with it over here. Before we ever represent our counter or whatever it is here, we can have the emotional reaction on either side, versus it being, if that's buyer to seller, that's emotional reaction here, emotional reaction here, emotional reaction here. And it's all happening in the same conversation, which obviously anybody who's ever gotten in a verbal argument ever knows that that's not productive.
Right. There's no pause. There's no breather. There's no space in between there for people to think.
To take a second.
To even think.
I think the space is a big part of that. And I think it's just really helpful to have somebody who can ask you those kinds of processing questions, to say, okay, you're angry by this. You don't want to do this. is you've got a whole list.
Yeah,
She's great at this.
We have a whole list of questions. If we have somebody who's thinking about terminating, or they're thinking about refusing an offer or something like that, we go through an emotional list and we ask things that's kind of like, will you find yourself regretting not making this deal work once it terminates? Are you in an emotional argument or an emotional place? While you're making this decision, and it's keeping you from being able to be logical. So we ask people to kind of go through that and just kind of question themselves and see. Sometimes it's like, no, we're going to go forward with the same idea. And sometimes, and they're real cool with it and they've got it figured out. And then sometimes it's, we're going to regret this. We need to go ahead and do whatever we need to do.
And just change it, which is fine.
So that's part of that pause. We've even decided within our team that even when we're selling our own properties, that we need to have another team member step in and represent us, because we've tried, doing some of that. And the emotion and the connection you have with your property sometimes is just too difficult.
Yeah, or dealing directly with that buyer, whoever it is, can just prove to be difficult because of what I just mentioned. You don't have that space to go and do that. Right. I think one of my favorite questions to ask people is just a very simple, like, help me understand. Is going back to the other side and saying, you're not going to do this, whatever thing it is for, let's say it's $400, it's different, right? Is going back to the other side to negotiate over this $400 worth potentially having to put, if you're a seller, if you're a seller, having to put your home back on the market, and re-deal with getting new offers and marketing and dealing with showings, right? Is it worth that?
Paying your insurance.
If you're the buyer, is it worth going out looking for houses again, potentially giving up the inspection money, the appraisal money, whatever fees you spent along the way? Is it worth this? And great if it is, great if it isn't.
Yeah, sometimes it is.
The answer doesn't matter to us. Right. We're asking this only because we want you to make sure you feel good in your head about this decision. So if you say, yeah, we're done, it's like, cool, we're done. And if you say, we're in, it's like, cool, we're in. It does not matter to us. We just want this to be what you want it to be and get the reaction that you want.
That really does help you process. We want people to process through it so it's not a knee-jerk reaction, and that they really feel good after they make the decision.
Yep. Yeah, well, some of those other questions that I think, you ask a lot, and they're so very helpful for people.
We do.
Talk about best of both worlds, having a real estate agent also have a background in counseling, y'all. For moments like this.
Yeah, it does come in handy.
This is like...
My skill does come in handy.
Yes, you spent 6 years in school for this stuff,
right.
Get your master's in it, all that. Yeah,
yes, yes, we did a lot of that. Well, one of the ones I like to ask is, are you attached to a specific number and you're not seeing the bigger picture? Because people do get sometimes attached and it's so easy to get just tunnel vision. On a process when you're negotiating. So that's our job, is to help people kind of widen their perspective, make sure what they're going for is what they really want.
Yep. Yeah, we've got a whole list of more questions too. So we'll save that for when you decide to use us for your real estate transaction. We can help you out.
All of our tricks.
That's right. So then you can't be like, I know what you're doing. It's like, well, good. I'm just trying to help.
Yeah, it's our job.
That's what we do. All right, y'all. Well, that's kind of what we have today for our negotiation tactics. Anything else before we wrap up? You want to make sure
just make sure you've got a good negotiator in your corner. I think that's really important. That is a realtor's job.
Yeah.
And and there's lots of different ways to do it. And the more, tools you have in your toolbox, the better. So,
and I think we did a whole episode on our the first iteration of our podcast that was all about how to interview an agent kind of thing. And I think I would add something like this in there. What negotiation training have you had? If they haven't had any, I think, even if you haven't had formal negotiation training, I think that if you have experience, talking about, I've made some mistakes in negotiation, and I've also had a lot of successes in negotiation, and being able to articulate what you've learned through that as an agent is important. And so that you as the home buyer, home seller can really figure out if this person's legit or not. This is one of the main pieces of value we bring to our clients.
Yeah, and this is a place where people lose thousands of dollars, or they can get thousands of dollars.
Yes. And all it was just going back one more time to ask, or asking in this certain way versus asking. Yeah, it's minute changes that can really make a huge difference to a transaction.
Yeah, and I'm always surprised, when we go back one more time, or we feel like, there's not going to be anything else to occur here, or we're done. And then sometimes we go back and we can get something done we didn't think we could get done. So those are exciting.
Well, and how many times do you say, all right, we're out on whatever this is, or the other side has said it's this or we're gone. You say, okay, see you later. And then they're like, actually, and immediately.
Oh, well, wait.
There's
we'll do it.
There's a lot of ways to play it. So
yeah.
You have to be okay when we go to say that in the first place of potentially losing that person. If you are cool and they come back with that, cool. Like it's another option for you to play. But you had to be okay with with that not going that way.
Yeah. So. And then this is something I would add to this because I've seen it. Some people, it's few, but there are some people that feel like they don't want their realtor to really know their bottom line.
Okay.
So they don't really want their realtor to know exactly how far they'll go because they feel like if they keep the pressure on their agent, that the agent might work extra for them.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you that's usually a prescription for a disaster.
Yeah, it's miscommunication.
Because then your agent doesn't really know what it is you want and they don't know where your lines are. Yeah. So the more you can share with your agent about where your lines are and what it is you really want, then the better they can go to bat for you. Yeah. And that way you're both doing it together instead of you doing it and keeping it all to yourself. And then your agent's their hands are a little bit tied.
Yeah. Well, what I would add to that is that, it's almost like a hiring problem. Like if you hired an agent that you felt like you had to hide things from, you didn't hire an agent you could trust. Or if you did hire an agent you could trust, obviously there's something going on that's preventing you from being able to do that. So I would go back even a step further and just say, hey, hire a different agent.
Yeah,
if you hire the kind of agent that you can trust with this kind of information that you think is going, because it should never be a question if your agent is going to represent you, whether you're at a price point difference, like if you're 350 versus 1.6 billion, whatever, right? Like that, the price shouldn't make a difference. The agent should always be going for you. The term shouldn't be different. The agent should always be working for you. Yeah. And so make sure you hire that kind of agent and interview that agent appropriately so you can figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a house at 1.6 billion out there?
Oh, there's gotta be. What? Come on. Somebody's built.
I want to see that house.
The Yellowstone Ranch, I'm sure would be something like that.
Yeah,
I'm sure something like that. Yeah. That's awesome.
I love it.
All right, y'all. Well, we're gonna wrap things up for today, but we just want you to know we sure do appreciate you watching us every single week.
We do.
And we'll catch you back next week again.
We'll see you soon.
Hey, thank you so much for watching the podcast today. If this has been valuable for you at all, we sure could use your help getting the word out to more people. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, go ahead and give us a follow and consider taking just maybe 2 minutes to leave us a review. Both do wonders for our show with the algorithm, and on both platforms, all you gotta do, head over to our show page. On Spotify, hit 3 dots and select rate. And on Apple, all you gotta do is just scroll down to the show and say leave a review. So just click that. If you're seeing this on Facebook or Instagram, a like or comment puts all the good vibes out in the algorithm for us. And on YouTube, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can be notified whenever we post a new episode. Join us again next week for more Fort Worth housing news and updates. Until then, y'all have a great week.